Jody Spiro is the Director of Education Leadership at the Wallace Foundation. Her career as a senior educator and manager of education programs has spanned the private, public, non-profit, and international sectors. She is the author of Leading Change Step by Step, Tactics, Tools, and Tips, and High-Payoff Strategies on how education leaders get results. And today in her masterclass, which is all about enabling leadership, enabling change, she's going to focus extensively on what does it mean to look at change in context of education and as education leaders.
Group here, we have about half an hour, and it's a kind of funny to say there's going to be a master class in half an hour. I think we would need a year maybe. So we'll do what we can in half an hour, but there is a PowerPoint that I will share, and you will have the PowerPoint to take away, and hopefully this is not the last time, this is not the only time we will meet each other. And any questions that you have, either stop me or put questions in the chat. Once I get the PowerPoint up, I don't always see the chat questions. So if you have a question, it's probably better to ask it. So great. I think everybody's been assigned now, and we've got the group. I wanted to also introduce my colleague, Jessica Fuhrer. Wave, Jessica. Jessica is my colleague at the Wallace Foundation. And so here's what you may expect and what you may not expect from this session, which is Jessica and I work at the Wallace Foundation, which is one of the largest foundations in the United States that works in education throughout the country. And one of the wonderful aspects of our work at the Wallace Foundation, our particular field within Wallace, is education leadership. And we have the privilege of working with school districts all throughout the United States. And the lessons that I bring to you today are not lessons that came out of my own head. They're lessons that both synthesize the research and the literature over the last 20, 25 years, but also have been discussed and tried out and made better by educators, education leaders throughout the entire United States. And regardless what their political persuasions might be, everybody is of one mind when it comes to education leadership and its importance and how we lead in the circumstance of change, which we always used to talk about, but now given the pandemic has become even more important than ever. So we bring you lessons from across the United States in large districts, which also we learn from our colleagues in smaller districts, really work in small districts as well. And so that's what you can expect here. But what you cannot expect is that I know anything about your context. And so I just really want to be clear about that. You are the experts in your context, and you will make sense of the material, some of which will resonate with you, some of which will not. And, you know, if you can take away one or two ideas from this, I think we would call it a success, or at least that's what I would call a success. So with that, I would just also offer, before I start, and I'm going to close with this as well, I would offer to everybody, if you have not gone to the Wallace website, which is wallacefoundation.org, on the Wallace website, you will find the most up-to-date research and evidence on education leadership. And everything on there is available for free. And you can download anything there. There's a whole big section on education leadership. And every year, the Wallace website gets about 750,000 downloads of publications, not visitors, but downloads. And one that I would recommend to everybody is, about a year ago, some of the best researchers in the States published a study of, thank you, yeah, published a study of it's a research synthesis of the last 20 years of research in education leadership. It's our colleagues from Vanderbilt University and the University of Colorado at Boulder. And anybody who's interested in education leadership, it's a really important read. Among the other things that it tells, which we've never seen before, is it does a statistical analysis which shows the importance of principles directly on students' achievement. And it demonstrates statistically that if you replace a lower effectiveness principle with a higher effectiveness principle throughout the entire school, you get student achievement gains of 3 months on average in reading and 3 months in math. Jessica, while I'm talking, would you kindly look on the website and get the title of the report and put it in the chat? Thank you. Yeah, the main author is Jason Grissom, and Jessica will put the title of that report in the chat. I mean, everybody on this call understands the importance of school leaders, but I'm afraid not everybody in society understands that. And just having that, there are comparable studies that show the influence of teachers, and that in their classrooms, teachers replacing an ineffective teacher with an effective teacher results in 4 months of gain in student achievement in math and reading, and that's wonderful. But the higher leverage is the leader, where you get almost the same effect, but not just for one classroom, but for the entire school. So I recommend that. You'll find other, I hope, other publications of real interest on Wallace's website. So what I'm going to do for the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to share my screen and hope that this works. And I'm going to show this PowerPoint. And again, the organizers of the conference are going to send you the PowerPoint, so you don't have to know that you'll get it. You don't have to write everything down. So the main topic overall is, so how do effective education leaders, whether they are in a school or whether they are in a larger district, how do they lead change, but particularly in times of ambiguity? And so we'll talk, and we don't have much time, so we'll talk pretty quickly about the characteristics of change, the 5 big principles of leading change through ambiguity. And then at the end, I really want to spotlight what I consider to be, if I had to pick what is the single most important way to manage and lead change, it's with something called early wins. And I want to spend at least the last several minutes specifically on early wins, because that's something that you should be able to take from today's session and immediately use and see the really good effects that you get. So here's something that I think most of us already know, but just to set the context. And this one, unlike what I said before about our experience only being in the United States, and it might or might not be true for you, this slide, I would say with quite certainty, is true everywhere in the world. So they're quite general because of the whole nature of change. And that change is constant and continuous. Therefore, sometimes it's frustrating. You think you've instituted something really excellent, only to find that because you did that one thing, now everything else has to change. And so the whole nature, you should not be frustrated. If you shouldn't think, oh, well, I did that and I still have to do more, so maybe what I did the first time wasn't a good thing. Not the case. You're always going to have more change and more change and more change. And at least knowing that is comforting. Change is something different. So change is not a value necessarily. It's not necessarily good. It's not necessarily bad. It's just different. And the successful change is one that is built on the values that people already have, or in other words, the culture. That if the change that you are leading helps to bring more of people's values to the front, then that's the kind of change in which you will be most successful. And again, it might help to know that change is always unpredictable. You can never say, we're going to do this, so it's going to result in that. You just don't know, because change is different. So you need to be prepared to make course corrections as you go along, because you will never know at the beginning. And some people make the mistake of saying, oh, well, this isn't working, so my original plan must have been bad. And that's not the case. Your plan could never predict everything that's going to happen. What it means is, it means that you have to really be monitoring your situation all the time so that you can course correct in real time and not wait 2 months, 3 months, a year to course correct. That's the mistake people make. They stick to what they had planned in the beginning and they don't course correct it. That's a problem. It's probably worth knowing that change makes most people uncomfortable because it's different. The change, I know that I was a good performer in the previous circumstance. I don't know if my skills, or I will be a good performer in the new circumstance. So most people are uncomfortable with change. And here's the point, right? Until they get comfortable when the value of the change has been proven to them. And that's when we get to it, is the importance of those early wins, because the early wins prove the importance of whatever change you're doing. And so here's 3 more points, again, just to make you comfortable with all the ambiguity of change. Change is never without trade-offs. Even something you think is very good, there's no such thing as something that's only good. It will be stressful. There are always trade-offs. And frequently I talk about the day I got married. And I thought that the day I got married was going to be the happiest day of my life. And I was not prepared for the stress that came with, am I doing the right thing? Is now what's happening? And so even when something is really good, you still have doubts. Because why? Because you cannot predict with certainty what's going to be happening. And this next to last point, please, again, if there are just a few things you take from this session, please take this one away, that change is always political. It always is. And sometimes you have in your head that you have this great idea, and the people you've discussed it with think it's a great idea, and you're all excited about it, and you try to implement it, and what happens? People object to it, people dispute it. And you say to yourself, well, I thought that was a really good idea, but I guess it's not a really good idea. And that's wrong. You have to be prepared. You have to know that change is always political. Why? Go back to, it's something that's different. If it's different, what does that mean? It means that there are people who benefit from things the way they are now. And when people benefit from the ways they are now, they don't want change, and they're not going to think that your change is a really good idea. And so avoid the surprise of when you try to implement a change and you get objection and you get opposition. Just understand that is normal and natural, and you need to persevere and not get discouraged because you're getting objection. And lastly, that change is now the norm. It's not something unusual. It's what we work with all the time. So let's see. Okay, I'm going the wrong way. All right. So I just want to, well, I can't see you. I was going to ask the group a question, but would you put in the chat whether is there anything of these characteristics of change that we just talked about? Put in the chat if there's anything there that is new for you or that surprises you in some way. I think we would love to know that if you put that in the chat. So here's the goal. This is a little bit of magic, right? The goal is to be intentional. And again, this is another thing I would hope you would take away from today's session. The goal is you want to be intentional with all those characteristics of change that we just talked about. You want to get control over as much as you can. And things will not go the way you think they're going to go. They'll be bumpy. But if you are always on top of it and you know where you want to go and you monitor it and you listen, and that's intentionality. And you want to get control over as much as you can. And as some of my American colleagues say, never let a good crisis go to waste. And so you've got a crisis. What the good thing about the crisis is, like the pandemic, not that the pandemic is a good thing, but you might as well use it to your advantage since we can't do, since it's here, is to use the crisis to get done things that you've always wanted to do. Because one of the things that happens is that when you have a really big change like the pandemic, it actually forces everybody to go out of their comfort zone. They are already out of their comfort zone, so change is not as uncomfortable as it was, and it forces people to rethink things. So think about what you have always wanted to do that now you might be able to do because people are more open to it. So we have 5 principles for leading change through these times of ambiguity. And one of them you may think is very strange, the first one, but I will tell you why it's not strange. Keep as much as possible the same. And you might say, wait a minute, this is supposed to be a master class in change. And the first thing Jody is telling us is keep as much as possible the same. What's that? And here's why it works. People cannot cope with too much change at the same time. And going back to being intentional, you need to be intentional about what you want to change, and then look to make it happen, and you don't want to inadvertently change other things. People can't cope with too much change at one time. The most change that people can be even remotely comfortable with is changing one or two things. And during the pandemic, everything is changing. And even during regular times, you cannot ask people to change more than one or two things. They can't cope with it. And so what you want to do is actually think through what's good now that we can keep the same. And it gives people a sense of comfort. Even though things are changing, this thing which we value will not change. And so the sub-bullets of develop and reinforce the vision and the values, our values are not going to change. Our vision is not going to change. The leaders in the States very frequently talk about the North Star, as is our idiom. The North Star, the big direction that we go, is around students and around students achieving. And even though we're in the middle of a pandemic and we have all kinds of problems, like no shortage of staff to drive buses to get kids to school, and how are we going to do the lunch programs, and all those things are really important. But if you keep the same, reinforcing the vision and the values, everything is about the children, then the practice may change, but the values and the vision will not, and they become a real basis upon which to go forward. The other thing, next one, that also makes people more comfortable is to show how what you're thinking of doing now relates to things you have successfully done in the past. So think through, even though it's not going to be entirely the same, what have you done in the past that has been successful, and use your history to drive you forward. The third one is about communicating early and often. I think this is something in the States that leaders have been able to do very well. They understand that even if we don't have the answers, we need to be communicating, and we need to be vulnerable. If we don't know something, it's better that we tell people, our communities, our teachers, that we don't know it. And what's confusing in the pandemic is you get different, nobody knows what's going on much of the time, and you get different advice from different sectors: the medical sector, the health sector, the education sector, the government. But the point is to be transparent about what you know, what you don't know. There's comfort in your communities knowing at least everything you know. And then, as you already heard, making those ongoing course corrections, because you can never predict where this is all going to go. And we will in a minute turn to early wins, which is what you do at the beginning to make all of this work. So what you're going to find on this slide deck are examples of what I've just talked about. They come from these district and principal leaders from across the country. Here are some examples of how they kept as much as possible the same. Here are some examples of how they've used past precedents. Interestingly enough, in terms of the pandemic and strategies, the four that are in bold here are actually strategies that have occurred throughout the entire country of the US. And that's unusual. Usually everybody does his or her own thing, but they're almost all doing mentoring, and they have all discovered the real importance and value of being virtual, so that even now that they're back in person, everybody's in school again, they still hold their meetings virtually, because it used to be a big problem that you used to have to ask principals to leave their schools to go to professional development meetings. Now they don't have to leave their schools. They can do it in school, and that's been a very big deal. And internships so that assistant principals can experience the principalship in real time, and the use of partners. So in the community, the different NGOs, the different community organizations, the parents associations, partners, the schools cannot do this big job by themselves. So being a leader means to recruit partners and use them. And the different techniques for communicating, the different course corrections that people have made, like continuing to use virtual for professional development, for example. And finally, I want to get to, for our last 7 minutes, using those early wins. And so I'm not sure, and I'd love for you to put in the chat whether you've ever heard about early wins before. Is this new for you? Because the early wins is because of all those reasons about the characteristics of change. The early win is the way you can lead change that accounts for all those different characteristics of change. An early win is something you can do within, or you can lead within the next, let's call it 2 weeks or 3 weeks. It's quick. That's why it's called early. And it's designed to give people, remember I said people feel they're not confident, they're uncomfortable. The early win is a step along the way to the larger goal that you are seeking. It is intentional, because if you didn't intentionally think about what can we do in the next 2 weeks, you actually would not even think about doing something like this. It's intentional. But if you say, we are going to, and you have to announce it and be public about it and be very specific about it. Here's what we're going to do in the next 2 weeks to get to our longer term goal that, let's say, over the course of the next year, we're going to really dramatically improve students' reading, let's say. But what can we do in the next 2 weeks that gives everybody confidence that we're on the right road, and that this change that we're working on is possible, it's beneficial, and we can do it. And so an early win is motivational. It gives people confidence. Can be done in a short term. It has to be tangible and observable. So you have to pick something that everybody is going to know that it succeeds when it succeeds. If you're looking to have dramatic improvement in student achievement within a year, maybe in 2 weeks, you can have teachers present exemplary student work that shows that the teachers are teaching in ways that inspire confidence that by the end of the year, students will learn more reading. It's one step along the way that again, everybody looks to, are there more benefits than costs? Is it worth my time? But the big thing about the early win is it's a commitment. You've got to make sure you can achieve it. If you put it out there, you have to make sure that it's going to work. And I mean, you can, because it's only a very small thing that you're doing, and you're doing it in 2 weeks. So what you have on the rest of these slides are some early wins that leaders in the States have used, like forming partnerships with local community organizations or revising leader standards. Mostly, I have to say, if you're looking for an early win, a place to start thinking about that is with professional learning communities or professional development. I don't know if you've ever thought about professional development as being motivating, but it is. And so if I were looking for, if you said, Jody, can you give us one early win that you think would be really good to try? That's one I would suggest. have a professional development session that responds to the needs of the teachers or whomever is going to be in that session. And then they see that as, wait, there's something in this for me. This, what we're trying to do is a good thing. You can never go wrong with professional development. And the principals specifically, this is the last slide, the principals specifically have done these things to as early wins. They have monthly, this is another good one, they have monthly recognitions or celebrations. That's symbolic, you know, so pick a team. It's usually not good to pick individuals, but pick a team or several people who really exemplify good practice and what you're trying for, and celebrate them and give them recognition and ask them to present to others. Engage your local universities in your professional development. Engage your local communities, but you can never go wrong with learning communities. And so sorry, I did that. Okay. So if we had more time, so what I'm inviting you to do is, this is just the repeat of the characteristics of the early win. I would really hope that as a result of this session, you would think about one win that you can do within the next 2 weeks and share with your colleagues, either put it in the chat right now or ask the conference organizers to share. And instead of just having the examples I gave you, we could have examples from everybody. And I'm going to stop sharing and say that we meant to end by 10 o'clock, and we've ended at 9:59. That's Eastern Standard Time. I would love for you to put in the chat, you know, for as long as they have us in this breakout room, I would love for you to put in the chat any of your reactions to anything we've just talked about, or any of your early wins. I see that lots of people have been putting things in the chat. I'm so eager to read them. And I just want to remind you about, please do explore wallacefoundation.org in the education leadership section. And I think you're going to find a lot of resources there that I think might be of interest to you.
Yes. Thank you so much, Jody. I think one definite piece that we will do, I think like you mentioned, is we will go back to our ecosystem, talk about these early wins and collate some of these early wins that I think our audience have thought of. And I think we will definitely share that with you and hear your thoughts, your inputs. I think that's one immediate next step that we will definitely do. Thank you so much, Jody, for taking time out. This has been amazing. I hope our audience members, again, like I mentioned, CSO, members from CSOs in India who've actually taken time, who've been very keen to hear you talk about some of these early wins and some of these leadership practices. I think in our efforts to work with education leaders back in India, these strategies, these inputs are of great value, and there's a lot for us to take back. And like I mentioned, we will get back to you on that next step, collate some of these early wins that our audience members have talked of and get back to you, and then definitely hear your inputs and continue to engage in this conversation. Your valuable insights are of immense importance to us here in India, where we are trying to run this mission. So thank you so much for taking
my pleasure. This was great, and I'm really looking forward to hear from as many of you. You know, that's what will really make this session have value. So thank you all. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.